Good evening, everybody, and welcome. I'm just going to make sure everybody's here. We all are. Wonderful. Thank you so much to everybody watching us this evening on YouTube. I am absolutely delighted to be here launching this wonderful book, The Oscillations by Kate Fox. And I'm even more thrilled to be joined by Kate herself, Jessica Mukherjee and Joanne Limburg, who will be joining us this evening for this wonderful poetry event to launch this beautiful book into the world. Extremely delighted to have this chance to do an online event and to be here with you all on YouTube. Just a few quick words about that for our audience. It's great to have you here, and please do use the live chat function to talk. Tell us where you are, tell us what you're doing this evening. I've already seen mention in the live chat of oscillating jelly, which I'm sure will really please Kate, who has also brought oscillating jelly. Please do chat, talk to us, leave comments, chat with each other. It's lovely to know that our audience is there. That really matters to us. Thank you very much. And thank you for coming to join us virtually for this lovely evening event. My name is Jane Kemain. I'm editor and director at Nine Arches Press, and I'll be your host for this evening. I'll be introducing each of the poets who will give us readings, and then we'll also be taking a short Q&A towards the end of this evening's event as well. So we will have a chance for you to ask your questions of Kate and to talk about the book a little bit and to talk about the oscillations. So please do join us for that part of the evening as well. So as we come towards the end of the evening, to ask your questions, please just post them in the Q&A in the chat on YouTube, and we'll pick them up from there and hopefully ask a few of those as well. But without further ado, I'd like to declare this wonderful book launch open. I hope you've all got your comfortable book launch slippers on for this wonderful virtual book launch. Thank you for joining us and gathering around the warmth and the glow of your screens. You're in for a wonderful treat. This is a book of great heart, of great bravery and wit, and it's such a huge-hearted collection, one that examines where we are now, but also looks into history, into the self, into stories from the writer's own life as well, but puts those into a real interesting comparison with where we are now. And the whole collection brings together this idea of distance and isolation, of place, of who we are and what makes us, the multitudes that make us as people. It's a really wonderful collection, and I'm so very delighted to have worked with Kate on this book. I'll say a little bit more about it shortly. But first of all, I'd like to introduce our first reader for this evening, who is Jessica Mukherjee. Some of you may know Jessica's wonderful Nine Arches collection, Tigress. Tell you a little bit also about Jessica and to introduce her this evening. Jessica Mookherjee is of Bengali origin and has lived in Wales, London, and now Kent. She's published in many journals, Agenda, Poetry Wales, The North, and the Rialto, and in various anthologies, including the recent Blood Axe Staying Human book. She was highly commended in the 2017 Forward Prize, and Tigress from Nine Arches is her second poetry collection. Would you please give a very big warm welcome to tonight's reader, our first reader for this evening, Jessica Mukherjee. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a real honour to read for you and for Kate. I'm going to start off with a couple of poems from my first collection. This one is called 1967. Here is a girl out of place, stranger and strangeness, both cold and grey. Her sari billows in English winds, a pale princess clutching her wedding gold. Red lips and bride mark like a wound on her head. She walks behind him. She walks away from here, away from her mother, father, who gave her to him. How quickly the shame sets in, feeling dirty under clean British sheets, alone and out of time as her bleeding stops, and her first child starts to kick. And inspired by Kate's beautiful daffodils that I can see there, this is a poem called The Milk. And for the non-Welsh in the audience, Mamgi is Welsh for grandmother, and Bendigaid Fran is a giant from Welsh myth. The Milk. My Bengali mother had no idea why I wore a daffodil, so the ladies fed me Welsh cakes and told me why I wore a black hat on St. David's Day. Dewi Sant, I wasn't sure who he was, but I thought I heard him in the waves off the mumble's head. I had no grandmothers here, just the Mamgis on the bus. Those crinkled Bridgets were my wet nurses feeding me chewing gum, peppermints, and their native tongue. Those old ladies fed me stories of frost-covered forests and Bendigaid Fran. They were my milk. It's coming in, see, they said, with an eye on the wind. Come, pray with us. I went to their chapel, where the wood is worshipped, and where they had me believe that the desert Bible lands were in the mountains of North Wales. And this poem is called The Liar. I never believed in Father Christmas as I crawled out of the chimney, soot-stained, ingrained dust in the whorls of my skin. I never feared the dark, crawled under my bed, talking to dust, moulding it into imaginary friends. We sang together to the soil. Suspicious of prayers to invisible gods, I stared at vicars and asked them who would go to hell, whether they worshipped thunder. I found runes in churches and muttered spells in graveyards, climbed into yew trees, licking insects from bark. I saw adults spin catching flies, never saw bogeymen lurking in woods or under bridges. I crawled from moss-damp ponds dripping with slime. No one believed me when I told them where I went at night. Under those trees, inside badger holes, curled up with foxes. Teachers and parents told me to tell the truth, scrub the earth from under my nails with wire, call me a liar, washed my mouth with soap. And these two are from Tigris. This is Amrita, which is the nectar of the gods in Hindu mythology. There were gods in our cupboards, a family of cosmic giants, shrunk to fit in our airing cupboard. The vastness of Brahma's Celestia's omnipresence infused our sheets, our school uniforms with the glory of Atman. She lit incense and fed him milk, said Bengali prayers under her breath. Krishna leapt from the piles of jumpers and folded towels to her delight. He closed the cupboard door and shut it tight, winked his god eye and skipped his musical way down the stairs into the kitchen. And she followed him, laughing, laughing. Kali, the cutter, had stolen out, tripped quietly behind them, tongue out, arms poised, ready to fight. Mother danced around the house with Krishna, oblivious, until she bumped into the black face of night, whose 1,000 eyes gripped her, 100 hands slapped her, and whispered, "Where are your children?" Neighbours brought us fish and chips that night, as the doctor's drugs turned the gods to ghosts. And Mother slept. She didn't know that the gods did not look after us. And this poem is from a poem published in Under the Radar and in my next collection. It's called Cracked Actors. That summer, I became Puck, Miranda, Titania. You turned Romeo, Hamlet, Antonio. Let's run away, you said. Peter Pan the fuck out of here. You stole your dad's Vauxhall Cavalier. I stole my dad's checkbook. And we drank as you drove down the motorway. I was in love with Bowie, and you were amused and jealous as I sang along to Diamond Dogs, Sweet Thing, 5 years. You said I was beautiful, so I shaved off my eyebrows and spiked up my hair. And Cupid blind, I knew you were desperate. I stood on the hotel room's bed with fishnets and fake fur jacket, painted lips of dust ruby to take you. In the mirror we melted together. Show real slow. Is it hunky-dory? I wanted to know. The tape recorder we bought on the way played Lady Stardust. We acted like movie stars. Nothing was safe. You were slick back, I waxed and waned, made up from a strange thing of you. Someone clapped. Did we make it from the bones and blood of us, all smeared like lipstick on the sheets as we fell to earth? When the theatre lights dimmed and we drove slow-paced, I was a vixen when I was back at school. You, Oberon, had a line or two to get through. I was playing kitchen sinks and gin until you were out of my system. Growing up in nightclubs. Kurt Cobain won't grow old. His bleak words smash my faith in songs my lovers are carefully grown to repeat mistakes over and over. My mother writes every week, tells me she won't leave the bastard. I just groan and throw away her letters. My lovers are carefully grown to repeat these mistakes over and over. My mother says she has no room to invite me home for Christmas. I just groan and throw away her letters. I just keep yelling, look at me, look at me. My mother says she has no room to invite me home for Christmas. My soap bubble friends glint pretty in light in cold ice nightclubs. I just keep yelling, look at me, look at me. And they leave stains on me like rust marks in a bathtub. My soap bubble friends glint pretty in light. In cold ice nightclubs, Kurt Cobain won't grow old. His bleak words smash my faith in songs and they leave stains on me like rust marks in a bathtub. And my mother writes every week, tells me she won't leave that bastard. And congratulations, Kate. And this is my last poem in Kate's honour. And this is a poem called Beast. There was so much hair. It clogged plug holes. She was forever combing and brushing his arms, back, neck. When he left for work, she set about brushing bits of his coarse lint from the back of chairs. Every day she swept up more bits of him. Large, brittle black toenails, flakes of scalp skin. On his return, she watched him slaver over the roast pork she made for him, leaving his saliva resting on plates. In secret, she collected his debris, made candles from his earwax, bottled him up, spun his fur into balls of wool, created a museum of his natural history, kept jars of him in the pantry, helped him to let the world believe he was a man. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jess, for that wonderful reading. That was just brilliant. And to go from Bowie to body hair in a very short leap with those wonderful poems, always so full of surprises and brilliant things and great observations. So thank you very much for that wonderful reading. Our next reader this evening, I am absolutely delighted to be welcoming Joanne Limburg to read with us this evening. To tell you a little bit about Kate, she's the author of 3 poetry collections, Feminissimo, Paraphernalia, and The Autistic Alice, all from Blood Axe Books. 2 of her poems appear in the Nine Arches Press disability anthology, Stares and Whispers, which was edited by Daniel Sluman, Kairani Baroka, and Sandra Allen. She has also published memoirs and a novel, and most recently used poetry to explore her OCD in the Radio 4 programme, Thought Pattern, Pattern Thought. And her next book, the non-fiction collection, Letters to My Weird Sisters, on autism and feminism, is coming out in July with Atlantic Books. An absolute delight to welcome Joanne this evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and it's a delight and an honour to be here. Congratulations, Kate. I'm so glad to be part of this evening. I always look when I'm reading with other people for sort of places where my poems talk to theirs, and Jessica was talking about girlhood and growing up, and most of mine are going to address that this evening. Mine are going to address growing up as then an undiagnosed autistic girl. And I was diagnosed in 2012 and I was 42. And so I had this project to try and re-understand my childhood through this lens. And I tried to write in first person, it didn't work. And then I wrote one poem, started writing a poem in the voice of Alice from Lewis Carroll's Alice books. And I realized that this Alice persona was my way in, because she had been, I suppose, a real passionate interest of mine from early on and all the way through my life. She'd stayed with me. So once I'd sort of called this child woman Alice and put her in a third person, she became much more mobile and easy to talk about. And in some poems, I simply used the name Alice, and in others, I actually used bits of text from the book. So they oscillate, there's an oscillation between these 2 extremes. And the first poem I'm going to read is the first poem in the sequence. And it refers to an unbirthday. If you remember, the Mad Hatter says you have 364 unbirthdays, hooray. And it relates to an early memory, which made sense in the light of my diagnosis. And it's called Alice's Unbirthday. Alice is 3 and she knows it. She's sitting face to face with daffodils underneath the washing line, which is a roundabout for clothes. Her mother pegs some clothes up, gives them all a ride and pegs again. Alice feels like trying something. I'm 4, she says. No, you're not, her mother says. You're 3. She picks Alice up and pegs her to this rule. It isn't saying it that makes it true. I remember very much that was an experiment of mine at the time. If I say I'm 4, will it make me 4? No, that was the answer. So this next one is called Alice's Face, and it's an example of one of those poems where I just used the name Alice. And one of the strange things about being an autistic person is that you come to realize gradually from other people's responses to you that your face, A, isn't doing what they think it should do, and B, isn't doing what you think it's doing. And you realize that people aren't talking to you, they're talking to this face, which is, as another autistic writer wrote it, has gone freelance. So I wrote about this experience. Alice's face. It's a piece of clothing she can't figure out, can't line up or fasten. It's uncomfortable. She fidgets with it, and without thinking casts it off. Forgets that people can see faces even when they're empty. Their voices come from far away, apologizing to the face, asking it what the matter is, what it finds so funny, what it thinks they've done to it. They suppose it's Alice they're addressing, but it's just her cast-off face, no more aware of its own motion than the anorak a smaller Alice let fly off a pier, The purple anorak the wind filled out for long enough to make someone mistake it for a child and swim out to her rescue. Alice remembers how she looked down from the pier to watch the nice man fetch her anorak. And this next poem is actually in the second person, and it uses bits from both books, blended them. And it's called Advice for Alice. Alice, people are not curiosities for you to stare at. They see you seeing them. They see you back. People are not chess pieces to be moved from square to square. They will not stay where you have put them. They are not lessons to be learned or verse to be recited. They are not information. You can't have them by heart. Alice, they're not just figures in your dreams. They have their own, and you might not be in them. There's no symmetry, no equity, no Caucasus race. You could swim an age in tears, then run yourself bone dry, and still be left without a prize. Alice, mind you don't confuse your prepositions. You should be in love with, not at. And this next one is one of the two that's in the wonderful Stares and Whispers anthology, which I was so delighted to be in. And again, it blends from the two books, and you'll figure out what's going on in it when I start reading it. The Alice case. The problem with Alice, the caterpillar says, is her rigidity of thought. Yes, says Humpty Dumpty, and her lack of empathy. Indeed, says the caterpillar, her mind blindness. Yes, says Humpty Dumpty, her inability to read faces. Indeed, says the caterpillar, or tone of voice. And then, says Humpty Dumpty, there's the flatness of her affect. Alongside, says the caterpillar, the strangeness of her prosody, as well as, says Humpty Dumpty, her adherence to routine. Not forgetting, says the caterpillar, her repetitive behaviours. Or her failure, says Humpty Dumpty, to understand a joke. Or her lack, says the caterpillar, of any feel for metaphor. Or her inability, says Humpty Dumpty, to hold a proper conversation. Excuse me, says Alice, may I say something? Of course, says the caterpillar, you may say something. Yes, says Humpty Dumpty, and we'll tell you why it's wrong. Autistic audience is always like that one. They like the next one as well, which is also about facing authority, actually, as a lot of the Alice books are, particularly in Through the Looking Glass. There's a lot of very arbitrary adult authority. And this is very much the experience you have as an autistic child. You're just wandering along the world, being curious and logical, minding your own business, asking polite questions, and suddenly someone yells at you for no obvious reason and then asks you to do something that makes absolutely no sense. And the Red Queen in Through the Looking Glass is a particular offender in this respect. There's a theory that she's based on Miss Prickett Pricks, Alice Liddell's governess. And so you could see her as based on her, and not, as my husband thinks, my mother. Honestly, it's not just my mother, it's lots of women who police younger women. Alice and the Red Queen. Alice takes her first steps late. Before she can take a second, the Red Queen grabs her hand. Stand up straight, she says, and stop that, whatever it is. Alice, are you listening? With that, the Red Queen starts yanking Alice in and out of rooms. Say hello, she shrieks. Say thank you, say your name, don't chew your hair like that. There are others keeping pace, but no one has to yank them. They can run and speak together. Smile, coos the Queen. You won't crack your jaw. Why are you so serious? Because it is a serious effort, this running to keep pace with all the other ones. Stop sulking, snaps the Queen. "You need a bra, some heels, and sit with your legs together." Growing up makes running harder, but the Queen is merciless, dragging Alice far from home. "Have some fun," she orders. "Get a boyfriend, have a drink, dance for me, girl, dance." Dancing is worse than running. Every bit as fast, but now there are steps to remember. And the Queen's still shouting, "You're drifting, Alice. Look how far ahead the others are." Alice glances at the Queen and sees she's now as tall as her. "Screw you," she says, and walks. For the last poem, I'm going to go somewhere different in the book. The other main sequence in this book is called The Oxygen Man, which is about a bit of a downer, really, losing my brother to suicide. And I wanted to sort of talk to the poems in Kate's collection that were about loss and also about trauma and repair. And this is very much that kind of poem. My brother lived in Middle America in a college town. And after he died, I went out there for my first and only visit. And every day I saw a different person who would tell me something about my brother, and it was like they were giving me fragments. And then in the end, I went home with real fragments. I went home with half his ashes. And I thought about the story of Isis and Osiris, Isis who goes into the underworld to reassemble her brother Osiris and bring him back to life. And this is called Sister. She will harrow this town. She will turn him up, whole or in pieces. Being a sister, she knows that brothers are born to trouble. Her part is to rescue him, lend him a heart to face his enemies, or failing that, confound them herself with withheld smiles, or with her sharp big sister's tongue. And if she finds them gone to ground, their damage done, she'll cut the losses for both of them and seek him out wherever he's lying, broken, and say, "Brother, there's no shame in one lost battle, or in 10. Put the file down, don't drink." And if it is too late for that, she'll scruff the man and stick her fingers down his throat, or find an antidote, or make her own, or heave time back, or failing that, and even failing that, she'll take him home and never mind how small the piece is. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joanne, for those incredible, beautiful poems, for that beautifully astutely felt poem that you've just read for us, which you can really feel the sharp edges of the loss within that, and also for Alice and all of her acute and brilliant observations. It was fantastic to hear your poems. Thank you very much for reading with us this evening. Our final reader for this evening is Kate Fox, and we're absolutely delighted to be launching her wonderful book, The Oscillations, which I have here this evening. And to tell you a little bit about Kate as well, and to introduce her, and also to say a few words about this collection and how it came about. Many of you know Kate. She is a poet based in Northern England who has made 2 comedy series for Radio 4 and regularly written and performed numerous broadcast poetry commissions for the Verb and Saturday Live on BBC Radio also. She's won the Andrew Waterhouse Award for Poetry from New Writing North in 2006, and her previous publications include We Are Not Stone from Zuban 2006, Fox Populi from Smokestack, and Chronotopia from Burning Eye Books. She completed a PhD in performance in 2017 at the University of Leeds, researching Northernness and comedy. And Kate loves swimming outside, spaniels, Doctor Who, and big skies. And it's been such a delight to work with Kate and to bring this book into existence. And we were talking just before we came live onto YouTube about the process, really, and that I realised Kate and I have probably known each other for about a decade nearly. I think we probably first met each other in 2011 or possibly 2012. So at least possibly nearly a decade, and we met actually at an Impress event where we were both, I was very new to being in Impress, which is a book distribution and support organisation for small presses that do an amazing job of supporting lots of independent publishers like Nine Arches in terms of helping us with our trade and distribution and access to bookshops. They also do a huge amount for poetry as well in the form of the Poetry Book Society. So it was really lovely to meet Kate there, and then we got talking, and I'd seen some of Kate's performances and absolutely loved her poetry, and I'd got a copy of Fox Populi, so we'd been talking about her work and her writing. And then Kate came and performed at a night we ran in Leicester Shindig as well, a couple of years after that. So I realised that the process of getting to know Kate and to publishing her wonderful collection of poems has been a really long and enjoyable journey. And we've also been very fortunate that pre-lockdown, pre-coronavirus, we were able to meet in real life and have several editing sessions and conversations about this book. One of the most memorable in a lovely cafe in Sheffield on a sort of late autumn but nevertheless quite warm day. We ate quite a lot of cake. We were turfed out eventually at 5 o'clock because they wanted to close, but we had a wonderful afternoon of talking about poetry. And what's always drawn me to Kate's work is just this incredible ability she has to balance so many things on top of a poem, and yet that poem always works, always finds its audience, always lands just so. It's a really impressive thing to be able to do. And she does that both in performance. I've seen Kate make things up and ad-lib brilliantly when she performs, as well as remembering poems and performing poems in a really incredible and compelling way. But also on the page, that her work just has this incredible ability to kind of bring so many things into focus. This is a dazzling set of poems that skillfully does that. It measures the distance between things, between the before and after, between trauma and happiness, between safety and danger, between self and others. But it's also a book that results in a kind of balance amidst all of that, between what might often be opposing things. And Kate Fox always does this with something that can only be described as a sort of sure but light grip of the emotional heft of the subjects. It's a very sort of a very clear sense of knowing what she's doing, but also having a lightness of touch whilst doing it. And when often those can be quite heavy subjects or quite difficult or weighted subjects that she's talking about. And these poems are at points humorous, but also have this dart of darkness shot through their weft at various points too. They're poems that bring all those multitudes into balance. And amidst that, I think the poems in the Oscillations find strength, resolve and repair. This is a book also quite uniquely shaped by the pandemic, in that Kate last year took the decision to sort of split the book into a before and after, which I think was a really brave and interesting decision, and to bring in the poems that she had written from the earlier experiences of last spring, and to bring those into the collection also. I think that's an absolutely vital and really interesting decision, and the way that those poems now resonate with the other poems in the book, I think, is extraordinary. So very excited to be publishing this. A huge congratulations to Kate this evening, and without further ado, may I introduce our final reader for this evening, the wonderful Kate Fox.
Jane, thank you so much. What a lovely introduction. What an amazing editor you are. And I always hoped to find an editor like you, and I did. And thanks so much as well to Jess and Joanne. I just noticed that although one of the many ways that all three of our poems connected, I mean, there were lots of ways, but I am slightly disconnected from all three of you, because of course Jess, Joanne, Jane, the three J's, here I am, a Kate. I've just noticed that, and that's slightly satisfying. Thank you. I've now characteristically changed what I was going to read because of Jess and Joanne's brilliant poems. Like, there's a poem I now have to start with, and I had it all neatly planned out, but neatly planned out, it's quite boring. Hello to everyone, by the way, who's watching. I am kind of following the live chat, as well as being in a little separate Zoom room where I can see Joanne, Jess and Jane, and looking at my phone and my screen and my book. That's totally fine, isn't it? Anyway, that's the new world. I can do it. I can shift my attention. I'm going to focus it on this poem first, though. It's called Masks. Here is a girl stood alone in the middle of a white aircraft hangar who needs somebody to take her hand. Here is a girl joyously kicking up brown leaves. People mostly see only one of these. Here is a girl wearing a badly fitting clown mask, plastic mouth rim digging into her top lip, and a girl in a lacy blue bodysuit which raises a red rash on her tummy. Here is a girl who can make a room full of strangers come to hug her like their own. Here is a girl who doesn't quite recognise herself, though there are always plenty of photos. Here is a girl who became a woman who can see behind masks and round corners and hear the gaps between words and things where light pours like falling water. Here is a woman who knows she can travel as fast as rewind to where the girl stands alone in a hangar filled with the sound of arrivals and departures. Here is a woman who knows that it will never be too late to stand alongside the girl in the hangar, take hold of her hand and squeeze. Oh, so I didn't mean to read that first. I've never read that out loud, and it caused me to have feelings. I try not to have feelings if I can possibly help it, but it sometimes seems to arise. I think I should talk about the daffodils, actually. The lovely daffodils behind me. Jess mentioned daffodils. Joanne mentioned daffodils. Unplanned. These daffodils, basically, yesterday, they were just green stalks. And I was seriously on the point. I looked up on the internet, how do you make daffodils come out? And apparently you blow them with a hairdryer. And this nearly happened, but it felt wrong. It felt wrong somehow to be blowing daffodils with a hairdryer, forcing daffodils that didn't want to come out. And then, to cut a long story short, the miracle of the daffodils, they are now daffodils without a hairdryer intervening. Thank goodness for that. So there are daffodils in this poem, which I wrote about my stepmom. She would have been really annoyed, I think, to die on April the 7th last year, which is when she died, because it's the day when most people died last year, and she was never a joiner in. So I think, yeah, that would have struck her wrong. And in some ways, it was a blessing that she died. She had vascular dementia. She was in a care home. She may or may not have died of COVID at that point. I'm kind of glad that she went then rather than later, in honesty. Thought we wouldn't have a funeral. We did have a funeral that was perfect, weirdly perfect in the end, for all its restrictions. The funerals happened outside, if at all, the end of that spring, when daffodil coronas crinkled like elderly necks, this year's tasks done, lining the verges as if waiting for someone to clear them away. We gathered under the shelter of the crematorium's porch, semicircling the coffin they'd brought out on a trolley like luggage. A small music speaker, a photograph of her, magically restored to 22. Hand sanitizer in our bags, 7 shot glasses for sherry. I didn't know the green globe ready to release when the petals fall is called an ovary. Her neighbours placed a plastic folder containing a photo collage of her garden on the coffin. The display she didn't get to see this year has never been more magnificent, and something I only half believed when every afternoon ended with the totting up of the dead. The day after she died, her daffodils bowed their heads. I really want to go see her daffodils, actually, this year. They're in Bradford, but there'll probably be some awful poignant twist, like the new owners of the house will have dug up all the daffodils, and that would kind of be worse, wouldn't it? It's best just to imagine. Imaginary daffodils, imaginary flowers in real gardens, as Marianne Moore said about poetry. See, that's a very poet thing. You just toss in a quote from a poet. Anyway, okay. This is a poem I was going to read first. It's in the before half of the collection. I did a project with the photographer Colin Potzig, whereby he took photographs of his lockdown walks and I responded to them with my poems, and sometimes vice versa. And I think there I've created a tiny revolution, because Joanne is autistic and I'm autistic, and mentioned another autistic person. You know, representations of autistic people are usually only allowed to be one at a time. That's the quota. Of course, they don't talk to people, have any friends, gather in groups or anything. So that feels good. Okay. Stump. Like a punch from behind, a tooth breaking off at its bloody root, leaving you with a shocking black gap. Like waking up at your own snore, gasping for air. The upending of the world when you put your foot on a step that isn't there. It's all right to tell us this had been foreseen for years, in plans, models, rehearsals. That's not how we were struck. That's not what froze our core, like the siren of the alarm clock, a white bomb glare. So tell us again about what always grows back. About slender shoots growing from blasted stumps, green fishing rods into the future, tender rebuttals to the torn out page that used to be tomorrow. Here is destruction we can bear to look at. Here is hope we can borrow. I've got quite big on symbols of hope, hence the rainbow behind me, and the daffodils. And what else have I got? Oh yeah, I've got the in the bowl there is the oscillating jelly. My friend Katie, who is one of the friends here in Whitley Bay, who has made my lockdowns more bearable, and we have gone swimming in the sea and walking to get coffees in a perfectly legal way. She suggested that there should be launch food that oscillated, and her first suggestion for some reason was spaghetti. I don't think spaghetti oscillates, does it? But jelly oscillates. So there is my oscillating jelly. It shouldn't be possible to fail to make jelly, but that's actually my second attempt at jelly. There we are. Right. The distance. Anyone else get worried watching people on telly standing too close together, they ask? People want an explanation of how quickly this distance became their new lens. We're wired to notice what is dangerous and therefore important. I don't have a new instant overlay for the world though. Now spiky virus cells circulate like planets. I was always clumsy and elliptical, unsure of the correct orbits. How close was too close, how far too far. I fix instead on another left glove on a branch, singular as a vernal star. So I have 5 more minutes. That's quite weird. Time is going, usually it goes fast in reading. I'm finding this going slightly slow. Maybe that's a good thing. Maybe I'm in a slightly different, more retentive place than I somehow sometimes manage to achieve. Swimming pools. I'm missing swimming pools a lot. I'm missing bookshops a lot. This one is really written about the Forum bookshop in Corbridge, which was the last bookshop I went in the first lockdown. And it will be the first bookshop I go in on hopefully April the 12th, called Returns. The plague books won't be in yet, but the dystopia section will be well stocked, and you'd usually want 2 meters of space to browse anyway. This last shop I came to on purpose, a pilgrimage. Then, the assistant said, they still had customers. Her son had been sent home for coughing in PE. So there's where I'll return first. Enjoy the full shelves, calming lines, the glossy wooden lectern, the smell of new, the rash of woodcut covers in striking monochrome, the imprints from London, Chicago, New York. I spent £50 I no longer had last time. We'll spend another 50 next. Feeling I'm preserving an ecology, a sort of home. So happy for this normality, my eyes will fill so the titles are blurred. But reading, no, can hardly take in a word. Although actually for me, one of the great things is that my ability to read has now come back. And it was so weird experiencing a time where lots of people couldn't read all at once, all together. I am so relieved it's back. And actually a brilliant thing. And thanks again for all of you who are here tonight and all of you who've bought the book, as well as, you know, hearing words, being together. We are also supporting the work of a fantastic indie press in Nine Arches, who has somehow miraculously just kept on doing all that they do throughout the pandemic. And it's just Jane and Angela, really, Angela who does the marketing, and they are, yes, miracles. Yes, and we're supporting, I suppose, bookshops and publishing, so let's keep on doing that. Okay. There's lots of poems about breathing in the collection. It comes up again and again. I suppose I've not said explicitly, have I? But I probably had COVID pretty early on last year. I'm still a bit breathless sometimes now. So it's called Breathe. 1, 2, 3, be mindful, they say. If your epithelial cells are under attack, just breathe. You can be whoever you want to be, they say. Despite the death of industry, expel the coal and metal dust from your lungs, just breathe. We are all equal. We are all free, they say. I'm going to go back on that one. We are all equal. We are all free, they say. Even with a knee on your neck, just breathe. The sea and the trees unclog in this pause. Open to the sky and just breathe. 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 Ooh. Well, that should technically, in fact, I reckon I'm a minute early, which was unusual. But then we could have slightly more Q&A, because to me that felt like the last poem in a set. That really did. It did. So I'm going to end there, and then we get to have questions and that. So that'll be nice. Thank you.
Kate, thank you so much for an extraordinary reading, and always such a great chance to see you perform your poetry. It really is, and great to hear those poems all together as well, both looking at the situation we're in, bringing plenty of perspective on that, but also this great encompassing that your book does of all kinds of subject matter and bringing those together in such a clear focus. Thank you so much. Congratulations to Kate on her publication of the Oscillations, and we've got some really lovely comments on YouTube, which I'll just share because I'm popping in between YouTube and our Zoom meeting here, but I can also see lots of lovely comments from people. People saying that their poems were brilliant. It gave me chills, very much missing bookshops too, says David Hartley. Nikki Hasty says more poems the better, says Karen Smith. The poems are brilliant, Kate, keep going. Trish Trainer says this is amazing. And Barrington Gordon says, so gently sincere about your loss. Sue Spencer says, this is bloody brilliant. So just to share those with all of our guests, because I think it's always lovely to hear those. And I'm going to bring all of our guests back into the room now as well. So as we go into the Q&A part of this evening, we will return to Kate for one final poem at the end of the Q&A also. So if I might, while our lovely audience are thinking of questions to ask, and they'll be fed through to us here in Zoom, if I can maybe have the first question. Kate, would you mind if I ask you about the title? Because I think it's a wonderful title for the book. And I can't remember the exact point where we agreed on the title, but I think it encompasses things so beautifully. Could you tell us a little bit about why the Oscillations and what it particularly means for this set of poems?
Yeah, so the things that I was thinking about when I was writing the poems had movements of oscillation in. Let me explain. I just finished my PhD, which was about stand-up comedy, and I was thinking about how that movement between a performer and audience is a constant oscillation of feeling, and also for comedy itself to work, you kind of break something and then you repair it instantly. So there's an oscillation there, and that is also the same movement that comes when you are either writing about or healing or thinking about trauma. You can, in order to not just be stuck in the trauma, but able to kind of work with it, you have to go into it, but then be able to go out of it, back into it, out of it, back into it. And I was like, oh, well, these are all oscillatory movements. And so I would never, if you'd asked me, I would never have thought I was going to name the book for a movement, but actually it seems to say something about processes that are really important to me, and not least of which, of course, in the end, is writing itself.
Poetry is a way of kind of bridging some of those things, I guess, and poetry is a way of moving around them and not necessarily coming up with answers for things, but exploring those things and measuring the distances between them, what that actually contains, what's in between those things, I guess. I remember talking about the order as well, and how the poems kind of came together as a set. That was a really interesting process, and I think I can remember a conversation we had when we were in that cafe in Sheffield, talking about the way the poems were sort of orbiting around different things, and that idea of orbiting and moving. And I think it was very much apparent as it started to come together, and the things that added up to make this collection. There are poems also about Northernness and Northern women, and that as an identity, and they felt quite important, and at various points sort of in oscillation with other poems. I know we talked about what fitted together, and I'm glad that those are in the collection, because I feel there's also like a conversation between all of those about a bigger picture almost, isn't there?
Yeah, exactly. And actually that makes me think of another, well, as you say, the oscillation between identities that everybody undertakes. There's almost this idea that we are maybe just one thing, but of course we're not. And in performance you can really see that. And sometimes I'm guilty of saying, oh, I'm a Northerner, I'm autistic, I'm a woman, as if any one of those at any moment can encompass what's going on. And actually the real story is I'm oscillating wildly, which is the name of a Smiths song, but doesn't have Morrissey singing on, so it's okay to like. Oscillating between all of those positions, their performances and positions and realities and identities and all sorts, all at once.
Yeah, I think definitely it's a really interesting way of exploring poetry. And is that something, Jessica and Joanne, that echoes with your own experiences too, of how you approach writing and bringing subject matters into your work?
Yeah, I mean, most definitely. I mean, there's a multiplicity of identities all the time, and I think there's a sort of, what I love about Kate's and Joanne's poetry is this sort of defiance, because why should we be one thing? Why can't we be? Well, I used to have a boss who used to say more of everything, and you know, that sounds like something Alice would say, and why not? Absolutely, Kate. Yeah. So we're and I think that's the best thing to do, isn't it? Oscillate wildly. I like that.
Absolutely, yes. I think in a poem you can move in a space between identities and between voices. And one of the great technical breakthroughs of my life was when I discovered that I could use the italics key to use a different voice. You know, it's such a small thing, but so I could then dramatize these conversations between me and my sort of internal, metaphorically speaking, voices. So yes, it's always about movement. It's always about keeping things in play.
That's a really interesting image, isn't it? That I think almost sometimes as poets we're kind of keeping lots of different things in the air all at once, and sort of seeing how it lands perhaps, or how it all comes together, what pattern it will make for us. We've got some really good questions coming in from the audience, so I'm going to ask one of those from David Hartley for Kate. He asks that clearly the first lockdown made you very creative and productive. Are you finding the same rush of creativity in this lockdown?
Yes, and hello David. I think we last saw each other at Artscape, the conference for autistic people and their friends, in a lovely outside space. For similar reasons, in that I kind of got commissions, which meant I had to have a rush of creativity. I honestly, if I didn't have to finish the book and I didn't have the commission that I had with Colin, I think I would have just sat on my phone reading The Guardian and the Daily Mail. Sorry that I read the Mail online. I know it's not right, but it's really good for doom scrolling. And in this lockdown, a publisher has asked me to write a book of the Northern Women Show. And they approached me by saying, oh, we bet loads of other publishers have approached you about this. No other publishers had approached me about this. And I've had from January till the end of March to write the book. It's perfect. So I'm almost not noticing this lockdown as much because I'm just on a writing retreat. I wouldn't have gone out that much anyway. So I feel very, very lucky. Deadlines and structure has always motivated me, and it's worked now. And I suppose that's that interesting thing. Writers, we're supposed to be floating around in a garret in a fair and airy way, but actually if you're a jobbing writer, you kind of have to crack on, and that's saved me actually.
Thanks, Kate. And a sort of related question a little bit here from Carl Tomlinson, who asks the idea of breath and not being able to share the same air. How has that been part of your writing during COVID?
Oh, that's such a good question. Hello, Carl. Last met in Grangemouth. Okay, it made me realise that pretty much annually for the last few years, I have worried about being able to get through performances through not being able to speak for coughing or breathing properly, because every year I would have a respiratory illness of some sort and just thought, oh, well, it's just a thing. And then this last year's respiratory illness was COVID, but I wasn't really able to perform anyway. So for me, I think there's been a freedom to writing that is not always available to me in performance, because you don't need actual breath to write where you do to speak, I think.
Thank you, Kate. And a question from Louise Beach and then one from Molly Russell that are sort of related. Louise asks how you felt to be diagnosed as autistic at a later age.
Yes. Hiya, Louise. Last seen in Hull. I'm going to say that about everyone. It's just so nice to think of other places, isn't it? I felt relieved and pleased that I hadn't just been imagining it, and I was glad to actually have the validation. And I thought, right, good, now I can speak out as an autistic woman, and that needs to be done because there's not enough of us, and people like Joanne have led the way, and writers like Catherine May and Laura James and lots of writers kind of in the years before that. So I felt like I could join the fight, and I know that's very much not a narrative of suffering or pain or trauma. That all came before the diagnosis. The diagnosis was the good bit.
And a question from Molly Russell related to that for both Kate and Joanne, asking how autism informs your writing.
Oh, it's a difficult one because autism is everything that you are. So I always say, when people ask me that, I always say, well, I don't have a control Joanne who's not autistic to compare with. But one thing I would say, I think more poets are autistic than may realise, or people may realise. There's something about what Freud called the thing presentation of a word, the physical aspects of language. It's very appealing to autistic people. I talked in that poem about strange prosody, but that is one thing that is literally said about us, that we have strange prosody. And we do have a tendency to neologisms, to enjoying puns and playing around with words. So I think that probably informs it. And also, writing for me is a compensation. You know, when your face is misbehaving, how can you make yourself understood? You can do it by making your language as precise as possible, because I'm always trying to translate from something that feels untranslatable.
Oh, yeah, well said. And I suppose, and I'd agree, I can't write from another place, so I don't know. I have noticed in going through the book actually that although at the back I say, oh, well, these poems, these are my autistic poems, but then I've looked at nearly all the other poems and I'm like, oh, hang on, but this one and this one and this one, and oh yeah, that'll be because I'm autistic. And I do recognise certain patterns of thought, feeling or expression actually that are that. So Yeah, I wanted to, there was something that you said, Joanne, that I was going to add to or respond to, but now I'm having to go backwards over it. Oh yeah, writing being a compensation. Yeah, absolutely. There are basically poetry is a place, seems to not fully know how it is a neurodivergent happy place. Like most poets are neurodivergent. I'll stick my neck out, 75%? 75% at least. Do you think? Maybe? I reckon.
Yes, I think a lot of some are known to be, and some would admit, and you know, it's for everyone to sort of own their own information and define themselves. But I know, for example, the late Roddy Lumsden knew that he was, and of course Les Murray was. I had a wonderful meeting with Les Murray once where we looked in two different directions and talked about cats, and it was just great. So yeah, I mean, not all poets are autistic, but there is a big overlap in the Venn diagram between here are the autistic people and here are the poets. It is just a wonderful playground for language, and you don't have to abide by the normal rules, and it's understood that within the frame of the poem the normal rules may not apply, so you then have license to just talk like yourself.
I love that idea of it as a wonderful playground when none of the rules apply. I kind of feel like I'm hanging upside down from my ankles by the climbing frame in poetry sometimes. So it is, like you say, there's that enormous freedom, isn't there, to play with language and to do things. So what a great metaphor. Thank you for that, Joanne. I shall think on that. And also I should mention that Kate has a really great interview up on the National Autistic Society's website at the moment, and it's on our Twitter feed and on Kate's Twitter feed also if you want to have a read of that. She talks a little bit more about the poetry and about aspects of autism and how that informs her work as well. We've probably got time for two more questions, so I'm going to go next to a question from Louise Tonder, who asks, how important is place to you in terms of setting, but also in terms of where you write your poems and the places that inspire them? And I'll ask Kate, but also Jess and Joanne, if you'd like to chip in as well.
Yeah, no, I think, thanks Louise, that's a great question. I think place is vital to my work actually, but in the same way that it's vital to my life. I just feel entwined usually with wherever I am, and I have always felt particularly entwined with the section of northeast English coastline where I am now back living. I've moved away 5 times from here and I've moved back 5 times from here, and there is, the sea just opens me up, but there's also something about the people of this part of the world, and that definitely makes its way into my poetry. Yeah, it's also part of who I am. In terms of where I write poems, ideally I would have been writing more poems in cafes with people around me and the chink of latte cups and cake plates being delivered. But actually, I suppose I've done all right just on my settee in the flat, but maybe more so because I know that the sea is just outside there and there's the vista that I can free myself into.
Yeah, so interesting to hear that. I think I've got a different relationship to place, because I think coming from an immigrant family, there's always a sense of dislocation about where you belong. So for me, I always think poetry quite likes gaps, likes the spaces between things, likes the oscillations, it enjoys that. So I find that I have a strong relationship to places, but I never feel I quite belong in any of them. But then maybe that's why the gaps between myself and the place become a poem. So I think that's quite interesting. But I also think in terms of where I write, like Kate, I think I need space. I mean, I lived for 30 years in London, and as soon as I moved out, I found the poems appeared because there was a bit more space maybe around. But yeah, the sofa's fine, you know. depends where you are. You have to write.
I'd echo what Jessica said, you know, being Jewish, coming from an immigrant background, and also the whole story of my people is built around exile and wandering and being the perpetual foreigner and being the perpetual stranger. So if I deal with place, it's usually either specific, it's one room in one house, or it's a room I remember from my childhood, or it's some kind of conundrum. I'm trying to figure out what is my relationship to this space? How can I be part of it? Because I'm not sure if I really am. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to be.
There's that great sort of Welsh word, isn't it, hiraeth, which is the kind of longing for somewhere you haven't been. I remember listening to one of Jane's poems, actually, about how she, just as she was coming home, she felt this pull, and I almost wept, because I thought, I wish I could feel that. So there's a place between things. So yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, for me, it's about particular people in a particular place, and so because so many of my family have gone, I'm aware that place I think of as home, that I dream about, that I take a bus to in my dreams, I'm trying to get back to, is in a very real sense not there. There's a very odd feeling. Yeah.
Gosh, that's really making me think in a much stronger. I know that is the thing of, recognize your privilege, but I suddenly recognize, because I didn't have a sense of belonging really in the family that I grew up in, or the home I grew up in at all. That was very much under question. But actually, I then could go into the northern landscape and spaces and go, I belong here. I definitely belong here, and that was not under question. So if I'd not had that, that would have been doubly painful. Okay.
It's a really interesting subject, isn't it? Poetry and place, and what we're doing when we write about place or explore it in our work, and the idea of belonging or dislocation within place too. I think we could almost have a whole podcast on this. I kind of want to almost kind of carry on this conversation, because it's really fascinating. Thank you so much for all of the wonderful responses to the questions this evening, and to our audience for asking such good questions too. I've got one last question, and then I'm going to invite Kate to read a final poem for us. That question's from Lucy Martell, who asks, is it a smooth oscillation between poet and comedian, Kate? How do these coexist for you?
No, it's hiya, Lucy, last seen in Bradford, where I grew up. No, not a smooth oscillation at all, but maybe the fact that it's not a smooth oscillation is adds some helpful tension. There's always been a great tension in my life, which is why in my head I've always had this little compartment of, one day there will be a book and none of the poems will be performable and none of them will be funny in any way. It's like I almost wanted to create this massive separation. And I'm almost slightly miffed when people are going, yeah, some of the poems are quite funny. And they read quite well. I'm like, damn, I failed. And at the same time, of course, I'm quite glad, because it would be weird if I completely separated off everything that made me who I am as a speaker, writer, performer. So yeah, it's a productive, painful, tense, useful oscillation, but I'm sitting better with it now than I ever have, actually. And having help with that, it was vital. I think had I not had Jane to midwife an element of the move from I always have to have a punchline and I can't in any way format my poems very well on the page, then I would have struggled. I really, really, really needed Jane's help there.
Oh, it's a lovely process to work on these poems. It's been really exciting to see the book sort of, encompass all of the things that it's brought into its heart, and for readers to see readers enjoying and loving those poems also. So what a great question to finish on. I've got a few thank yous to say this evening. To say, first of all, to Jessica Mukherjee and to Joanne Limburg, who've been our special guests for this launch. To Kate Fox herself for joining us this evening to launch her wonderful collection. To my wonderful colleague, Angela Hickin, who's been helping us tonight with all the questions and the tech and various other things in the background. And also to our wonderful audience, a huge thank you for coming to join us this evening on YouTube and joining us for this wonderful launch. The book is available from Nine Arches Press. You can pop along to there and buy it. Forum Books, who Kate mentioned earlier, will also have some signed copies. So if you like to get your books from an independent bookshop and would like to support them, they will have some signed copies in the next few days as well. And also, if you prefer to use bookshop documents for all of your feedback, for all of your cheering, it's been so loud and warm and wonderful. We've been able to feel it across the airwaves here in our Zoom bubble online. Thank you so much to our lovely YouTube audience for joining us this evening. Thank you again to Jess, Joanne and Kate. I'm going to now hand over to Kate, who's going to read the final poem for this evening, and then the event will end. So Good night, everybody. Take care. And here's Kate Fox to send you out into the evening with a wonderful poem.
Thanks so much, Jane. Thank you so much, everybody. One of the things I loved most about live performance was it was a space where I could give and receive love, actually. I didn't really think that was possible on Zoom and YouTube and whatnot, and yet somehow I have felt it very much. Thank you tonight. And love runs through the book. Intimate love, partnership love, family love, friend love. This is the last poem in the book. It's a love poem. It's called Emergency. Promenades and tables refilling, like the drip, drip of the espresso machine. We look for normal, we look for calm, trying to forget even air can cause us harm. And all the time you were there, necessary and breathable, as parts of us kept emerging, like an arm out of a stuck sleeve, that big orange moon, the ferry beyond the pier, a snail after rain. Both of us return again through the emergencies, the snapped windscreen wiper, the laboured breaths, the last breaths, the torn muscle, while beneath us, between us, sometimes despite us, love spreads like a satellite signal, like sea foam, like spilt coffee on a countertop, like home. Thank you.